I want to welcome all of you. My name is Joe Steinfield. I'm the moderator of this series called Stories to Share. This is the 7th and next to last presentation of our first season. And we are starting to think about next year. And we will resume in October on the first Friday. So mark your calendar for October 7th. And we will continue along the same lines. Some people always show up late. First, let me thank Beltetz for being the sponsor of this series. Generous of Beltetz. I'm hoping to speak to David and sign him up again for next year. Also, Becca Fredrickson, many of you know, is the executive director of the Jaffrey Civic Center. Sean Driscoll has been handling our technology right from the start, and I want to thank you, Sean. And I really want to thank all of you as well, who started to come to this series last October. I think some of you have perfect attendance records. And it's very gratifying because we thought when this idea was being hatched that there were many people, local people, who had interesting things to say, and that people would come to hear them. And looking around, as we lawyers say, I rest my case. And when we asked ourselves last summer, well, who would be a good person? Who would have stories to share? It didn't take long to come up with Jeanne Duval, who, as I suspect all of you know, and we have more than 20 people joining us online, is a Jaffrey person, but she's also a person of the world who got her arts degree at UNH, her Master's of Fine Arts at Brooklyn College, who has exhibited all over the country and in Europe, whose paintings are in galleries all over the place, coast to coast, and who has won many awards, including 2 MacDowell Fellowships, and, thanks to Owen Houghton, I know this, Jaffrey's award as the Bicentennial Queen. So, some years ago. Well, I could go on and on, but I won't. I just want to say that Jeanne Duval is really one of ours, and it's a pleasure to introduce her here today.
Here we go. As a child, I lived to color. And as a young adult, I lived to draw and paint. I was not a natural. It did not come easily to me, and I struggled. But what I lacked in ability, I made up for in determination and passion. I worked very hard with the goal of trying to recreate the beauty of what I was looking at, even if that meant copying the images on sugar packets from the old Ford restaurant in Ringe. I bussed tables while my sister Janet waitressed. I was 12. My very first class took place right here on the lawn of the Civic Center with a man whose name I think was Stephen Reed. Again, I think I was around 11 or 12. I would love to know if anyone here happens to remember him. I also at this time discovered the art books in the Civic Center reading room and thought I had found paradise. So many memories of sitting with Claire Moore while thumbing through these books. This exposure to the beautiful paintings I had not seen before was very special to me. The Civic Center was also where I had my first exhibition in 1980. Another experience around the same age, 12 was a big year for me, was when I witnessed an Asian woman painting at the end of Ellison Street. I marveled at her landscape easel, the oil paints in metal tubes, the array of brushes, and the subtle color mixtures on her palette. Her interpretation of what she was painting let me know immediately that I was in the presence of a real painter, a professional. I never knew who she was or why she was painting at the end of my street, but I did know I was deeply transfixed and inspired.
Want to hear
A few years later, I took a landscape painting class with Richard Whitney and a life drawing class in the original Sharon Art Center when it was still in Sharon. I have often wondered if the center would still be in existence if it had just stayed put. As a sophomore in high school, I chose to attend the Dublin School after a disastrous freshman year at Conant. I had come to Conant after attending St. Patrick's School and was horrified with how disrespectful students were to the teachers and to each other. I'm hoping that this is no longer the case. But on a positive note, I got to take an art class with Peter Pelletier, who I adored. Dublin School was a very special place for me. Students were from diverse backgrounds and nationalities, which of course broadened my small town horizon. At Dublin, learning outdoors was equally as important as learning indoors. At the time, you didn't even know the depths of what you were learning. You were always just left with a feeling of exhilaration. And how lucky I was that Jill Sanders was at Dublin at that same time. She has remained one of my closest friends for all these years. As much as I loved my time at Dublin, I chose to graduate a year early for a number of reasons. One being my sadness around my boyfriend's tragic motorcycle accident. I remember feeling a profound turmoil and a strong desire to move forward quickly. I left Dublin to attend Marlborough College in Vermont. Marlborough offered me many exceptional experiences, particularly around Marlborough's music department and summer festival. Rudolf Serkin was the music school's director, and Pablo Casals both taught and performed at the school. However, the art department, unfortunately, was very limited. I knew that my growth as a painter was not going to happen at Marlborough, so I transferred to the University of New Hampshire. At UNH's art department, I was introduced to Bruno Civitico. Hold on for a minute, let me see if I can do this. I had no idea at the time how profoundly my life would be affected from that point onward. Bruno was an exceptional painter and teacher. He expanded my view of what painting could be and the endless possibilities of picture making. He had many solo exhibitions at Robert Sholkoff Gallery in New York, which was rare for a UNH painting professor. There were other painters as well who also exhibited at Sholkoff Gallery, who became very important to me. These are all paintings of Bruno's. Excuse me. After UNH, upon Bruno's recommendation, I attended graduate school at Brooklyn College in New York, knowing that there would be professors who would be sympathetic to the kind of painting I wanted to do and who I could learn from. Leonard Anderson was someone who taught me so much. Before I continue talking about Brooklyn College, I'd like to backtrack a bit and tell you about the semester I took off from UNH to go to Paris. I had never been in an airplane. I did not have much money, and I had no idea where I was going to stay. I landed in a Fleabag hotel on Boulevard Saint-Michel, and a few days later, I moved to a slightly better Fleabag hotel, where I stayed for a couple of months. I spent my days walking through the city, visiting every museum I could. It was an exhilarating and eye-opening experience for me. To this day, I still can't believe my parents let me go at age 18. I asked my mother about it years later, and she replied, "There was no saying no to you." A personality trait I still suffer from. Okay, back to Brooklyn. There were many well-known painters that both taught and attended graduate school at Brooklyn College. In the mid-20th century, they were abstract expressionists and color field painters. And in the late 60s and 70s, there emerged a figurative revival, also known as postmodernism. Several painters became disillusioned with abstraction. Classicism and figuration became subjects worth exploring again, but in a new way. The subject matter suddenly opened to all kinds of new ideas and inventions. It became inclusive. This Newsweek cover by William Bailey in 1982, titled "Art Imitates Life, the Revival of Realism," gives you a sense of the popularity representational painting had at that time. It was a very exciting time for me to be entering into the New York art world. And I was so fortunate to be offered opportunities that would pave my way forward. And as you can see, the newsstands had to put little pasties over the breasts. While living in New York for grad school, I fell into the most amazing job at a houseware store called Ad Hoc. A store that introduced high-tech items generally used in a more commercial setting that now had an everyday use in the home. This is around 1978. Some of what I'm about to read is from a booklet on Ad Hoc published a couple of years ago. I have always liked to organize spaces, even as a little girl. While working as a sales clerk, I would walk around the store and reorganize. Soon, Julia and Judy, the owners, decided that I would be best suited as the display person for the store. That started my education. Once the store closed each day, I would go in to clean, reorganize, and give the store a fresh new look. My eye developed through practice. I learned about color massing, creative juxtapositions of varied materials like glass, plastic, stainless steel, and china, and the importance of lighting that would bring the displays to life. Mondrian was often a source of inspiration for me. There were other aspects, aside from the display work, that contributed to the magic of that time. I felt fortunate to be a part of something so exciting and important. High tech was taking off, and that brought into the store many celebrities who wanted to see what this revolutionary store was all about. I certainly met people I would never have, I would never have met. Even Yul Brynner came in shortly before he died. I made some very close friends at Ad Hoc. One person whose friendship helped shape my life for over 40 years is Laura Moorhead. You will hear more about her a little later. Music had also taken a new turn, and it was an important part of the ad hoc shopping experience. You would often hear groups like Talking Heads, who would come into the store often. Clothing styles changed too. Black was suddenly the go-to color. 40 years later, I still haven't shaken off that trend. I was fortunate to have had 3 residencies at MacDowell. My first was in 1981. I was 25. I had never experienced such peace and quiet. My only task was to paint, and it was amazing. It was a fun residency as well. Everyone worked hard during the day, and we would party hard at night. The rug got rolled up in the library, and the music came on, and we all danced. That didn't happen during my other residencies. My second residency was probably the most memorable. I was working on a large still life in the Alexander studio, which you see here. Chris Barnes, the director at the time, asked if he could bring someone by for a studio visit. It was William Lieberman, the curator for the new Lila Ackerson Wallace wing for 20th century art at the Metropolitan. Lieberman, after returning to New York, visited Sherry French Gallery where I was exhibiting. He chose a painting to include in the Met's collection. The chosen painting was titled Ethereal and Earthbound. I did that in 1983. And unfortunately, the chosen painting was already sold. Recognizing what an enormous opportunity it would be for me to have a painting at the Met, the purchaser donated the painting.
Wow.
I think this person is in the audience. Nancy, are you here? Thank you. This was such an honor for me. The second painting they acquired, Still Life with Partridge and Corn, painted in 1988, was included in a Met publication titled Still Life, The Object in American Art, 1915 to 1995. It was a catalog which accompanied a traveling exhibition. The partridge was courtesy of Randy Canoyer, Jaffrey's funeral director, who found the bird on the side of the road and thought of me. And the third painting they acquired was titled Without Liberty from 1984. Unfortunately, I don't have a photo of that painting. While at UNH, I lived in an apartment in Portsmouth. The apartment was in a beautiful Victorian home owned by Christopher, AKA Kit, and Noel Clues. We became very close friends. And one summer, while at graduate school, they asked me to travel with them to southern France to watch over their 2 girls. Kit's grandfather, Henry Clues, who was the son of a wealthy Wall Street investment banker, was an eccentric sculptor living in New York City in the early part of the 20th century. He had lived in Paris and studied with Rodin. And after receiving a negative review for a New York exhibition of Henry's sculptures at the Met in 1916, he fled to France in search of a greater artistic freedom, end of quote. Henry and his wife Marie moved to La Napoule, a town on the Mediterranean between Saint-Tropez and Nice, where they purchased a castle needing a great deal of restoration. They began this reconstruction in 1918. I had never been in a castle before. The French, Italian, and Spanish furniture and the decor were extraordinary. Henry and Marie entertained extensively, hosting celebrities from around the world. The chateau remains a foundation and offers residencies for artists. I have included another one. I've included a photo of a painting I did there, which made its way to American Artist magazine. After my Lana Pool stay, I took my first trip to Italy. I'd made enough money by selling the paintings I did at Lana Pool to pay for my trip. I ended my Italian tour south of Rome in a town called Gaeta. It is a coastal town halfway between Rome and Naples. Gaeta was where I met up with Laura Moorhead, my friend from Ad Hoc, who was visiting her boyfriend, Tony. She and I planned to fly back to New York together. I fell in love with the South, the light, the sea, the beaches. I found it to be as beautiful as anything else I had seen on my tour. This is a photo of Laura and myself many years later in Sperlonga. I'm going to backtrack here. So this gives you an idea. There's Rome up there on the left and Naples, and the large arrow is where Gaeta is, kind of halfway between the two. And where there's a slash on the second arrow is what I'm about to talk about, Itri. And then further up in the mountains is Campo de Mele, which I will get to in a few minutes. But this just kind of gives you an idea. Okay. We both wished we could stay longer, but we needed to return to New York because Ad Hoc was opening a new store in Soho, and I was responsible for setting up the displays, and Laura was to be the new store's manager. So back to New York we went. 3 months later, Laura was back in Italy to marry Tony, and I returned about a year later. Tony didn't know he was getting a 2-for-1. Before returning to Italy, I was fortunate to have received a grant, and I had a successful exhibition at First Street Gallery, which helped pay for my return. Tony and Laura restored old houses. They were just completing a project in the historic section of Itri when I returned. Itri is a medieval hilltop town inland from Gaeta. I was able to stay in this house until it sold. While there, I found my house across the street. It was bought one room at a time from 4 different owners, believe it or not. It took a few years to get all the rooms to make it a home. Tony was so helpful in finding these owners. I remember one person lived so far out in the country, we could only drive to talk to him at a certain time of year because the trail was unpassable. These were people whose pots and pans hung from trees. It was something I had never seen before. I'm not sure Tony had either. Itri was badly bombed in World War II. Whoops, excuse me. There were shells of buildings where once stood homes in the old section where I lived. It felt mysterious and in a way both sad and beautiful. Not this part, but you could see what was once an interior wall of a home where now bushes and trees grew, and an arch on the wall, which was once a vaulted ceiling. There were wonderful old ladies who lived on my street. That's Itri. They lived without central heating and spent their days up in the mountains at their plot of land, which supplied their food. I loved them and they loved me back. I was always remembered when they returned with their harvest each day. I would end up painting some of what they gave me. This was a time when donkeys carried wood and supplies. It was very old world living and I loved it. I was inspired by 17th and 18th century painters like Melendez and Caravaggio. And so much of how I was living could have been back in that time. Whoops. The photos of my house before restoration are still in Italy, but I do have a photo of a jug that was sitting on the table in the vaulted kitchen when I first walked in. This was a jug that would have been taken down to the central fountain for water. And it was the first of my extensive Italian pot collection. I went online to see what photos I could find of Ytri, and I couldn't believe it. Not the big door, but that little door on the side, that was my house. That's how I entered. That was up on my little balcony. Little funny shot in the living room. And then they had these old stairs that I somehow felt needed a little decoration. So I painted objects on the front risers. You can't see, there are little pears up on the very top one. This one, I love the scissors on down the lower. I have another Italian pottery story. I used to take the train to Naples. It was a bit rough in those days, so I would dress as much like a boy as I could. I love the museums, and I also love scouring through the streets looking for still life subjects. I remember finding a beautiful large platter with a wrought iron stand. I purchased it and carried it against my chest when I was back home, against my chest. When I was back home in Ytri, I had to walk up the stone stairs that went from the new section of Ytri to the upper old section where I lived. It was pouring rain, and the medieval stairs were very slippery. I started to fall, and in a split second, while holding my platter against my chest with two hands, I had to make a choice. Drop the platter so I could use my hands to brace myself, or hold on to the platter and risk breaking a kneecap. I chose the latter. I also would often take the train into Rome. Two of my closest painter friends, Amy Weisskopf and Diana Horowitz, were living in Rome at that time. This is a painting of Amy Weisskopf, who also studied with Bruno Civitico. Did I just unplug?
Right there. And she move the camera so they can come back on.
Are we okay?
Oh, there we
There we
go.
go. Yeah.
And I'm just gonna move the camera a little bit so that maybe the folks at home can see that a little bit. So we're good. But Amy's online, so I want to make sure she can see her.
That's so sweet of you. Whoops. And Diana Horowitz,
Get
one of
that,
her landscapes.
the whole screen with her, but I can't get it.
Is she talking?
Yeah, well, she's not supposed
Yep. We ended up painting a lot together during those years. As young painters, we would share ideas, and we would share new discoveries like a new color mixture, a new brand of paintbrushes, and we were always in search of the best linen to work on. The three of us were obsessed, and we worked very hard. It was an exciting time. This is myself and Diana painting a landscape up beyond Ytri. This was the painting when it was done, completed. Rome was very different in the 80s than it is today. You could still find small family-owned trattorias, and you could still find streets uninhabited by tourists. Of course, you can still see beauty today, but it just isn't the same as it was. We often say to each other how lucky we were to have been in Rome at that time. There's a funny side story I'd like to share with you. I became friends with Maria Teresa, who was born and raised in Ypres. I had been painting, preparing for an exhibition in 1984 at Sherry French Gallery in New York. I asked Maria Teresa if she would like to come to the States with me, which she did. Due to my mistaken calculations of what time we needed to arrive at the Rome airport before our flight, we were late. Because we were late, we had to be bumped up to first class. Maria Teresa immediately put on the slippers and gets all her first class accoutrements in order. And never having flown before, she thought this service was normal. A little ways into the flight, she turns to me and whispers, "Keith Richards is sitting behind us." I didn't quite hear her, so she repeated, "Keith Richards from the Rolling Stones is sitting behind us." I turned around and sure enough, there he was with his family. We arrived in New York and I had to go to a separate baggage claim for my large wooden crates of paintings, and there was Keith waiting for his guitars. Then as we were leaving the airport to grab a cab, I see a friend of mine from my ad hoc days, dressed in aviation gear. He had arranged for a helicopter to take us to Manhattan. It was difficult for me to explain to Maria Teresa that none of these experiences on this trip were normal. In 1987, I returned again to the United States to work on a very large commission that I got through Sherry French Gallery. This is when I started renting a portion of Jaffrey's mill top floor to use as a studio. The couple commissioning the work owned the airspace above a building near Lincoln Center, where they planned to build an Italianate-style palazzo. I was to paint 4 paintings measuring 5 feet by 6 feet that would hang above 4 doorways in the Grand Salon. I chose the 4 seasons as my subject matter. With preliminary designs worked out for all 4, only one got completed, and that's this one, and this is winter. The commission got canceled because the wife had inherited an apartment at the Waldorf Astoria, and she preferred to live there. This is after so much work had been done by the architect, designers, builders, and so on. Years later, I was inspired to paint another musical instrument painting. This now brings me to 1989. During the summer and fall, along with my mother and sister, I helped take care of my brother, who was very ill, trying to live with AIDS. He had an apartment in Quechee, Vermont. I treasure this time spent with Jimmy. He would continuously say to me in his labored voice, "Slow down." I did slow down while caring for him and reached an understanding to experience time in a more purposeful way. It was a very strong feeling that I interpreted into a small landscape painted from his deck. This next painting was done shortly after my brother died. It's titled The Harboring. Mary Blaze, who modeled for the painting, would always let me know with a not so happy voice that it was time to quit. The pheasant had started to thaw and it needed to be put back in the freezer until the next night. She was such a good sport about it. In the mid-90s, I changed galleries from Sherry French Gallery in New York to Hackett Friedman Gallery in San Francisco. Michael Hackett was an exceptional dealer. This was a very prosperous time for many people, due in part to the dot-com bubble. Many figurative artists who previously exhibited in New York moved to Michael's gallery. This is Michael and his girls. That's Diana, me, and Amy, and that's Michael Hackett. And these are some of the paintings I'll just kind of flip through that I did at the time. These artists, along with myself, were also collected by a couple, Dawn and Allison Innes. They have put together a very extensive collection over the last 40 years that they house in a gallery they had to build onto their house. They've been very important to so many of us, and sadly, Don passed away in February. His larger-than-life smile will be missed greatly. This is all from the period at Hackett Friedman Gallery. In 2009, Hackett Friedman closed their doors. After Hackett Friedman, I tried several other galleries back in New York, but never found a good fit for myself. I'm currently represented by Winfield Gallery in Carmel, California, a dealer who is still excited about representational work. And these are a couple of paintings that have gone out there. Too soon. Around 1999, I moved from my house in Ytri to a farmhouse in Campo de Mele, a town further up in the mountains from Ytri in the coastal town of Gaeta. Campo de Mele was also famous for the longevity of its residents. The owner of this farmhouse and her daughter wanted to live in the village of Ytri. They did not like the isolation of the farmhouse. And because I was desiring to live more in a country setting, we switched houses. I had to pay additional money for her house, but that is how I ended up in Campo de Mele. There were olive trees, wild boar, geckos, and cows. Lots of cows. Their bells had such a beautiful sound, I didn't mind their presence, even though they managed to destroy any semblance left of terracing on the property. They snacked across the property on a regular basis. This landscape was very beautiful and inspired many paintings. Of course, there were tough times when I may have been alone for too long or was working too hard. I was happiest when there were others in the house, as long as they did not interfere with my painting time. Just a bit left of center up in that mountain, that was my house, halfway up the mountain. And these are some paintings that were inspired by my landscape there. I held summer landscape painting workshops for many years. It was such a pleasure to share this special landscape with people who ended up loving it as much as I did. I had several repeat customers. Although there was always, that's the town of Campo de Mele. My front terrace. There are a few here, I'll just look through. Although there was always a degree of maintenance done, on the house over the years, the time had come when it became too big of a challenge to continue taking care of it. It was sold a few years ago. I am fine about the decision, happy not to have the responsibility. I will always have that view in my heart and can always visit. I just couldn't resist putting all the bedrooms in. And this was a painting I did during that last summer there. This was one, and this was another one. I held my annual landscape workshop, but this time it was held at a rented house in Umbria. Fortunately, the workshop was just as successful as it had been in previous years. I plan to hold more Italian workshops in the future. In the future, excuse me. Someday, here's that, hold on. This was that. This was in Umbria. Someday, in-person classes will resume in the barn studio. But for now, I am content holding my classes via Zoom. And these are just put on here for the heck of it. There is no way I could give a talk about my life without talking about my parents, who so many of you knew. They were the most loving and supportive parents I could ever have asked for. With my somewhat unconventional pursuits, they showed me nothing but encouragement. I loved meeting them in Paris in my little car and traveling south through France into Italy, ending at my house in Ypres. We had many amazing experiences that will warm my heart when I think of them, that still warm my heart when I think of them. They were more like my buddies than my parents. And I am honored that their extraordinary work ethic got passed down to me along with their creativity. I have experienced so many chance encounters that have enriched my life as both a person and as a painter. And I am very grateful. I certainly could never have imagined all that was going to happen to that 12-year-old little girl sitting on the lawn of the Jaffrey Civic Center. Thank you so much for listening. My European friends for staying up so late. You can go to bed now.
You have time for some questions?
Sure.
All right, first in the audience here, raise your hand and then tell us who you are. Who wants to begin? Don't be shy.
Okay, I'll start.
Good. Stand up, please.
Oh, my goodness.
Speak up your fast.
My name is Michelle.
Okay.
My name is Michelle Steckler. I'm actually living in the second floor of John's house. My question is, what happened on those slippery steps when you were punching that? You painted such a vivid image and you chose the ladder, but did you break your kneecap?
I did not. I bruised it badly. I was in pain for a few days, but I didn't actually break it.
Laura. Oh, here's Laura.
Okay, I have a question to ask you about the process of painting. And the question is, how do you know when a painting is done?
It's very difficult. You get to the point where, and it's always painful, you get to the point where you know there's no more you can do to it. And it always falls so short of what you intended, what you wanted. And you just have to let go of it and send it on down the road.
The question is, the woman who donated your painting to the museum, what?
Sitting right in front of you.
Did you get another one, or did you get something else?
She did get something else. I don't think quite as extraordinary as that one. It really was an unbelievable gift. But one thing I will say about that is, this was the Met's MO, I learned later. They would go into the galleries, find the painting they wanted, and get a collector, get somebody to purchase it, to donate it. And they put together their entire collections this way for that 20th century wing.
Really? Wow.
A lady was asking how long were my residencies at MacDowell, and I was extremely lucky because they started off to be like 2 to 3 weeks, but you could ask for more time, and each time I got to double the time there, and sometimes there was one residency even more, so well over a month.
And I have an additional question about the commission in 1987. You said you completed one. Had you started on the others?
The other ones
Excuse me,
were.
Jean, repeat the question. too.
Okay. Lane was asking about the painting, the commission painting that I completed, and it was one of 4. And you're asking what happened to the other
Had you
one?
started the other?
It was, I wouldn't say, I didn't start the actual large painting, but I had done the studies for it. I had everything mapped out, of, what it was going to look like. They actually sued me.
Oh.
They, as I said, the wife decided she'd rather go live at the Waldorf. And they thought that they should take possession of the first painting. They had given me, a third of the total amount that they owed me. And I fought it and said, but I worked on all the other paintings, even though they didn't get completed. So I did win the lawsuit, but it was interesting.
John, you've had this rich experience of the last 30 years, but we're here today, and we want to know what you're going to do next. You're going to be involved and know where your next Italy is, or your next sort of creativity will come, and how we can all be a part of it and enjoy it.
I will always, I'll still have workshops in Italy. It'll just be at different places. I am starting to work on something here in Jaffrey. I'm not going to talk about it yet. I think you'll all see it soon enough in the coming year. So I don't know. It's just, I'm okay living in Jaffrey for right now. And I can't believe when I came back that I'm still here, but it's just the way it happened. But I get to travel around enough so that it satisfies me.
Well, we just don't want you to stop. So, no, you have
I'll try not
and
to.
our energy.
Thank you.
Yes.
Jeanne, when you do your Italy workshops, do your painters, the people that come in, do they have to have some painting chops before they get there, or will you take someone really unseasoned?
The question is whether Jean takes beginners.
That makes so more sense.
I happen to love beginners because they haven't learned horrible bad habits yet, and I get to teach them.
All beginners are welcome. Could you stand up, please?
I'm a beginner, and I love painting and love Italy. She's been one of the repeat customers. And Rosalie there. Yeah, Carol was a beginner. Anyway, we love Italy. Absolutely love.
I missed the question.
I'm just telling you that I was a beginner.
Okay.
And loved it. And they came to Italy, my workshop in Italy often.
That's all right. Hi, John.
I can.
My name's Kathy. I remember one of your very first pieces of work.
You?
No, oh, no, not really. No, I remember, no, it was like fifth or sixth grade.
Oh,
and
boy.
You did Mount Monadnock, an oil painting, and it hung in the library at school.
Really?
I think it was you. Yeah, I
Sounds
do remember that, and I'm so impressed. I couldn't even believe it.
Are you sure it wasn't in acrylic that I had copied off the sugar packet?
No, you weren't at the old forge just yet.
Yes.
My name is Jeanne Duval, and I was at one of John's shouting workshops at Campanelli. And it was absolutely the highlight of my life. I just can't, we painted 6 or 7 hours a day for 10 days. And then the rest of the time, we traveled a little bit around and got to see some of the sites. And went to some of the towns she's been describing and saw the half ruined, half modern structures. The best part, well, there are lots of good parts. The best part was the woman she had as a friend, she hired as a cook for us. I forgot her name.
I don't remember which one it was that year. Was it either Maria Victoria?
I think it was something else. She came up the lot from the town with the basket. And
With the basket, yeah, that was Maria Victoria.
she was, first of all, gorgeous.
Yeah.
Second of all, she would be full of life and full of everything. She brought all this wonderful organic food in her basket every day for the 4 of us, 5 of us, 6, for the 5 of us.
I don't remember.
Anyway, it was such a memorable occasion every day. It was just
Oh, I'm so glad. It's nice to
absolutely
hear.
gorgeous. And the other thing I want to say is that John is a wonderful teacher.
Thank you.
Are there any
Thank you.
dissatisfied customers?
Oh, don't ask, there might be.
Yes. Here's a question online from Linda Bantuzzo. Thank you for asking this. Does literature inform your work? If so, what do you read? And what brand of paint do you use? Well, let's take those one at a time. The first, literature, what do you
No.
read?
You know, I'm so angry. I have a painting here, and I almost was going to show it that I did on paper. It was a self-portrait with the hands over my mouth. I hate language. I don't get inspiration from reading for my paintings. In my, are you going beyond canvas?
No, we'll get to that one. Is it,
Oh, that's another person.
what kind
Okay.
of, Sherwin-Williams? I mean, what kind of
Blocks.
block?
Yeah.
And why do you use that paint?
It's, paint over the years has struggled with, commercial paint has struggled with the ratio, when they took the lead out and so on, the ratio between the pigment and the oil. And block still, I mean, you just lift the tube and it's really heavy because there's so much pigment in it.
And so you use it exclusively.
Pretty much
Where are they from, John?
Belgium. I think, pretty sure it's Belgium.
You did so many great note cards in our
Oh,
girls.
Jesus.
Kathy says you made note cards in Girl Scouts and asks, are you going beyond canvas?
No, not yet.
What became of the note cards?
I have no idea.
Well, her mother treasures him.
Well, I treasured her mother. Oh my God, her mother. I was very close to her. Also close to her brother.
Joe, when you were at that place in France, you painted the picture like on aluminum or something.
Yes, I painted on
Do
aluminum.
you ever
back
do
then.
that still, or?
No, I paint on copper once in a while, but yeah, that was a beautiful surface.
Yeah, the painting is gorgeous.
Yeah.
Again, it's terrific, Jeanne. You obviously put a lot of time into this. I so appreciate it.
Yes, I did. The one thing, the real time though was, I got on a tangent a few weeks ago. It turned out, what am I doing? This is like an art history class for painters, going in detail about all these different painters and who came after what, and who inspired. And it was, I just slashed it.
I wanted to ask you a question. Do you have a favorite painter other than yourself? And if so, who is it? You mentioned Caravaggio.
Yeah, I love Melendez. He's an unbelievable still life painter. I like a lot of different painters. I love Balthus. I don't know if anybody here knows about Balthus. He's an incredible painter. So I don't know, it's a lot. It's hard for me to just kind of pick, but certainly Balthus and Melendez are right up there.
Balthus and Melendez. So before we adjourn to the refreshments, this is Becca Frederickson. Go ahead.
So thank you, Jeanne, for doing this and for putting so much time and effort into it. It was really wonderful to see, and it's interesting for me as well. I'm an artist. In my past life, I was an art educator. I taught students from 2 years old up to adults, and oftentimes I would just go through like basic elements of art, and then I would talk about different subject matter. And one of the subject matters was obviously still life. And I had this book that I used quite often in class. And the book was wonderful because it showed really, really hyper-realistic still lifes, all the way down to completely non-objective works that were inspired by still life. And it's quite ironic that Jeanne was talking about her experience and being inspired here at the Civic Center by our art books and by the library here at the Civic Center, because my students were inspired by Jeanne. And I did not, I just found this out actually in working with her for this, because, I didn't connect the image to her until we were looking through her slides of the day, and that work that is at the Met popped up. And I often, you'll notice this book has little tabs in it, right? And they're the tabs of the pages that I used a lot. And I did use Jeanne's page quite often. And my students were always like asking about the dead bird. They're like, Miss Rebecca, I thought that animals weren't in still life. I thought animals were portraits. Well, it's a dead bird. So it's pretty still. But I was just, amazed to hear that. And this is the catalog that she was speaking of, and it's now in my basement with my pile of inspiring art books that I have. So thank you for that. I just wanted to share that connection.
It looks like a very
It's well worn. There's paint, there's all kinds of things. So that was one thing. So thank you for inspiring my students. And thank you for coming here and doing this for us. And then on a slightly different Civic Center note, if you haven't heard, we're having a little thing in a few weeks. We're having a gala auction. It is going to be on the 16th, and it is online now. We have a virtual component that you can bid on items, and then we'll also have a live auction here. So we do still have some tickets available, but they are selling, so we're doing well there. But I just wanted to share that with all of you, as that's an opportunity for all of you to come back and have some more wine in our jars and some more art here. So thank you again. Yes.
Thank you.